everyone. Oh my God, am I live? Yeah, okay, then I am. That's great. Okay, this is amazing. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for that warm introduction. I have good news and I have some bad news. Let's just take a moment. I'd love to align with you on this. Just take a moment and think for yourself. If you want to whisper to your neighbor, you totally can. If you want to pipe up on Slack, just show of hands. I'd love to align with us, like on a an approach together. Show of hands. Who would like the bad news first? Okay, great. Okay, physical hands. Thank you very much. Virtual hands. We'll see if we can get a count on those. Okay, so who would like the good news first? Interesting. And I'm wondering. Okay, so let's. Has anybody who's ever had some bad news to give has tried to soften the blow with better news first? Raise your hands if you've done that before. When you had some bad news, you tried to give some good news first. Interesting. Okay, so you can lower your hands. Thank you very much, everyone. Thank you for indulging me in this incredibly unscientific experiment. It looks like we're of several minds on our own preferences. So I'm wondering, what should we do? I mean, so first of all, let me just be really clear. There's no good news and there's no bad news, which is both the good news and the bad news. I'm going to actually suggest, and this may be an untraditional perspective, that we, I don't know, ask science which one we should do. And it turns out that science actually has some opinions on this. We don't have to guess. Doctors Legg and Sweeney did a study in 2013 where they looked at the preferences that people have on good news first or bad news first, and also which does what for a person. So it turns out, and just like the hands we had here, about 75% of folks want the bad news first, generally because I think we want to end on a high note. We think it will make people feel better. And by the way, I apologize if this meme excludes you, if you're not a Harry Potter fan. If you are, you're welcome. 65% of news givers choose to give the good news first. Just looking at the hands in person, I feel like you might be slightly different than the average. You're definitely not average people. Generally, we want to soften the bad news. And that is why I think many people have used the sandwich method. Familiar with the sandwich method? The sandwich method, I find, is not so delicious, usually because of what's inside the bread is not that awesome. And so there are better ways to give feedback for people. There's better ways to start the conversation. Here's the thing that's really interesting about the study that I found really surprising. Ending on a low note, giving people the bad news last, which is what most people do not prefer. Ending on a low note can help people be more motivated to create change. They really sit with the news. And so the question that we all have to ask ourselves every day when we're faced with these challenges is, what kind of conversation do you want to lead? By the way, I don't know if you can hear that in the background, but I am in New York City, so there may be a horn coming through. I apologize. Do you want to lead for change or for comfort? And so I'm going to pause here as a sidebar. When I talk about designing conversations, I'm talking about designing human to human conversations. And I define that process of designing conversations as a form of leadership. I want to give a shout out to Q and Andrew, their talk later today about designing human to computer conversations. I'm really excited for it. And I think you'll probably find some parallels between my theories and approaches that model human-human conversations and applications of those insights to human-computer conversations. My definition of design is Herb Simon's definition of design. It's easily the most broad definition of design available. If you haven't seen this one before, I'll break it down for you. To design is to devise courses of action that are aimed at changing existing situations into preferred ones. And this is really important. The flip side of this is really critical. Very, very few of us are able to get away with doing our job well by accident for long. We can't make things better by accident. And generally we get fired if we try to make things worse on purpose. So design is this really core and universal thing that everyone I think is doing day to day in designing their conversations. And I want to just draw this out for you just visually because I'm a visual thinker. When you have a group of people, that conversation that they're having moves them in a certain direction. And if you want to change the direction of the conversation, you have to design that shift in the dialogue. I want to be really, really clear. When I talk about leadership, there's a difference between positional and momentary leadership. Even if you were not crowned the leader, even if you were not authorized to speak or to gather people or to change the agenda, you still can be a cresting leader. You can rise up like a wave in the moment. And here's the truth. I know that, at least for myself, there have been moments when uh, I knew what needed to be said and I ignored that. And so to me, momentary leadership is even more important, that when that wave rises inside of us, we respond to it. And here's the thing, our lives are defined by the conversations we can or can't have. And conversations can be designed just like anything else. And in fact, we have to do this. Design requires that we design the conversations around us. Now, my mother, God bless her, has pointed out that she doesn't want to always be designing her conversations, to which I reply, I'm sorry, Mom, that too is a design choice. The world is filled with design, and the conversational spaces and patterns and spaces that we have our conversations in, a lot of them have already been designed for us, which means that if we want to live our life the way we want to, which is on purpose, we need to be able to design and lead the conversations that matter to us. We have to be able to step up and step forward. I would like to pause very, very briefly now that I've gotten some of the opening matter out of the way. I'd like to just acknowledge that I am in Manhattan, which is the traditional land of the Lenape people, past and present, and I want to honor with gratitude the land itself and the people who have stewarded it. This is my home. I'm on that little that second upper red dot on that small little island off the coast of America in a somewhat functioning democracy. And I just wanted to say that I'm grateful for this land that I'm standing on. I've gone to school and lived in this place my whole life. I went to City College, which is in Upper Manhattan, and I studied physics. And this is where I went to graduate school, where I studied industrial design. And you can see, this is a sculpture on the grounds of Pratt. You can see from this the kind of design that I learned at Pratt, is neo-Bauhausian weirdness. And so one of the things that hit me like a rock when I got out of graduate school was how important talking to my clients, talking to customers, facilitating dialogue was absolutely critical to making projects go well. It was, as a friend of mine likes to say, people all the way down, always. And so when I came across this idea of designing conversations, it really sparked something in me. And that's one of the reasons why I started the podcast 3 years ago. And I've been interviewing people who are much smarter than I am about how they design and lead the conversations in their work and lives. And if there's any wisdom in my book, it is mostly because of those folks. For the purposes of today, we're going to be talking about not just how to design, but how to lead conversations that matter. And so the arc of what's coming, the arc of the conversation ahead, just to be really, really clear, I am only covering a tiny, tiny thin slice of a very, very huge, very critical human topic. We're going to talk about how conversations have arcs, are in fact experience arcs that we are shaping all the time. I'm going to share the conversation OS canvas, at least some elements of it, 3 particular elements: invitation, threading, and goals. And I'm going to put them in a framework around meeting, because meeting is what we do so often. And for the sake of this talk, threading I will be interpreting as narrative structure. And the very last tool that I'll share with you is the conversational leadership matrix, which is about navigating these 2 tensions between asking and telling and problem and solution. So if you want to go take a coffee break, that's everything. We're good. This is the arc of the conversation, the beginning, the middle, and the end. And one of the most important rules of engagement for our talk together is I really need you to make this as practical as possible. I cannot do this work for you. I would like you to take a moment and think of a critical conversation, a conversation that has some stakes and and that you would like to reimagine. So I'm going to take a moment and sip some of my water while you think. Okay. Got something? Good. So conversations have experience arcs. And this is really handy thing to know because us designers, we know a lot about designing experiences and mapping them. This was one of the two options that I gave you, the good news first. And this is the experience arc of giving bad news first. And just to review, to be really clear, we prefer the bad news first. We like to just get it given to us straight. And yet often, at least science shows that this is what we do for others, which I find amazing. The gap between what we're designing for ourselves and others, to me, just shows an interesting misapplication of empathy and a lack of using evidence when designing experiences for others, which is, I would say, pretty core to the whole idea, the whole enterprise of user experience design and design as a whole. I had maybe one of the most delightful intellectual vacations of my life. I spent a week at the Harvard Negotiation Institute several years ago. And it turns out that, getting to yes, they talk about how untrained negotiators only ask their counterparts questions about their interests and preferences like 7% of the time, which is shocking. And so I would suggest that it's worth thinking about spending half your time thinking about others. So let's take a moment. I'm going to pause and take another sip of water. While I do that, I would like you to think in this critical conversation that you would like to redesign. What do the other people want? Can you build an empathy map for them? There's your moment to think. Just to put a fine point on it, to double stitch on this point, this is what I would do for any user experience that I design, for any workshop that I'm designing, and for any conversation that I am architecting. I will do an empathic walkthrough. I put on the persona as best as I understand it and walk through the arc as I have designed it. So I want to go a little bit more deeply and diagram the conversation I started with you. I actually started by asking you a question, by inviting you to make a choice how you wanted to hear the news. So I didn't actually start with the news. I started with giving you the entire arc to suspend the whole conversation in that overall uh, plan that I tried to paint for you. And I tried to indicate that I wanted to align. I tried to give you some time to think for yourself. I designed that conversation as intentionally as I could. And I want to break down a little bit what some of the components are in that conversation. And one is I tried to invite you to make a choice. We can shape our invitations, and I'm going to talk a lot about that in just a moment. Threading. I tried to structure an overall arc that felt as clear and wide as possible. Narrative is without a doubt a powerful tool in shaping communications. And I tried to make it clear that I wanted to align on an approach together. There are a lot of other elements of conversations. These are obviously, these 9 are not the only elements of conversations. In my research, I found that these are the easiest to see and easiest to shift. I also was thinking about turn taking. I was struggling with the interface because here we are in this strange digital space, right? And navigating, trying to slow down the cadence of the conversation a little bit to give you a moment to think. My perspective on design, I studied industrial design and I worked in UX for many years. And one of the things that was really surprising to learn about is that a design is not a design is not a design. Making a clay bowl and a wooden bowl or a glass bowl, it is still a bowl. The design is still the same. The designer and the intent is the same, but the material is different. And the material dictates a lot about what type of design is possible. Similarly, when we are designing a user experience design through our intent as designers, the question is, what's the material? The material of user experience design is very complex, but even more so, the material that is conversations. And I really want to make sure that you all leave here with some fundamental understanding of the parameters, the physics of this material that we're swimming in. And so here's really one surprising fundamental fact: 200 milliseconds. This is a really short amount of time. It's like a sprinter responding to a starting pistol. And this is fairly consistent over many, many cultures. The pause that we expect to feel, to experience between when one person stops their turn and another turn starts. If you wait more than 200 milliseconds, people start to think you're overthinking your response, which is shocking and crazy. And you all know this from your own experience. We've all felt, I have to have a response right away. When somebody stops talking, our mind races and we and ah and we grab for what we're going to say. And that's because it takes around 600 milliseconds to think of a reply. And so let's do the math. That means that there is 400 milliseconds of either garbled thinking after somebody has spoken, or more likely, and I know that we've all done this, or at least just me, we start thinking of what we're going to say before the person has spoken. And this is a really challenging fact. There might be 400 milliseconds where we're not really hearing where they're going. We already think we know where they are going. Similarly, we can actually speak only at 125 words per minute, whereas we can think at 4,000 words per minute. I find this a shocking gap. The conclusion that I make for this is that there will be always more to say than can be said. We can't possibly say all that we're thinking. Knowing that this is true can bring a transformational level of kindness into our conversations every day. We have to know our material, and conversations are the material that we are shaping day to day. Intentionality around each of these elements allows you to design the whole conversation. And so what I want to ask you to do, my next sip of water and your next moment to reflect, I'm curious. I know some of these are a little more alien, and some of these might be more familiar to you. And so I'd like you to just think for a moment in this critical conversation that you are trying to redesign. Which of these elements can you see in the current conversation? Which of these can you identify the current state of, or where you'd like to get these to move to? So I want to talk about meeting. I love this quote from Martin Buber, that all real living is meeting. And if your meetings don't feel alive, I am not surprised. 8 meetings per week on average. Again, we already established that you're not average. Who here has 8 meetings a week? You can raise your hand if you're here in person. I'd be curious to know, because yeah, probably nobody. You're not average. 10 meetings per week. That's 2 a day. 12? 12 meetings per week? Anyone? Anyone? Nobody's raising their hands. I can totally see you. Oh, no, there's some hands. There you go. 17 meetings per week is what the VP, director, or C-level roles, or anybody living through the COVID epidemic when all meetings are virtual. Yeah, that's all of us. The thing that's really shocking about these numbers is that if most people report that their meetings are unproductive. And so if you add up all of the people and all of the hours and all of their salaries, it comes out to maybe around $37 billion wasted, which is terrible and shocking. And so I have just a 3-letter acronym for you to use when you want to design better meetings. Just focus on the ING, which is invitation, the narrative arc, and the goal. I'm going to break down the I, the N, and the G. And the thing to know about invitation is that whoever must play cannot play. This is one of my favorite quotes from one of my favorite books, Finite and Infinite Games by James Carse. Force eliminates play. You cannot get the best out of someone through emotional blackmail. And so it's really important to understand that if you focus on extrinsic motivators like emotional blackmail or economic pressure or just inertia, that this is the way that we've always been doing it, you can command the body but not the spirit. Play, purpose, and potential are direct motivators, how you tap into the best of people. So when you're thinking about how to get the best out of people, think about what motivates them intrinsically. So I'd like you to take a moment and think about what can make the conversation that you are trying to redesign intrinsically motivating. How can you appeal to play or purpose? So I want to share, this is a portion of a poem from William Stafford called The Way It Is. And it's about threading. And I think it's just a beautiful perspective. There's a thread you follow. It goes among the things that change, but it doesn't change. People wonder about what you are pursuing. You have to explain about the thread, but it's hard for others to see. While you hold it, you can't get lost. The narrative, the thread in a conversation is what holds each moment of a conversation together with the next. And we know this from our own experience when we lose the thread or we try to pick up the thread of a conversation. And we all know that feeling of meeting an old friend after many, many years and just picking up where you left off. That thread is so easy to hold on to. It's impossible to get lost. But in a lot of our meetings and in a lot of our gatherings, the thread is really hard to find. And so the thread that holds a conversation together is a story, the story we're telling about what's happening now and the story we are going to tell about what happened. It's really important. And if there's one acronym, another acronym I can give you is the big arc and the little arc, what I would summarize as Bala. Interestingly enough, Bala actually means small in Sanskrit. So define for yourself the big arc and the little arc. Painting the arc of the conversation, it can create clarity, safety, curiosity, drama, and engagement. We know what's going to happen and we want to come along for the ride. And if you can, thread these smaller arcs together and connect them into a larger picture. And so I'm sure, I know that I've gotten these texts. Can we talk? My blood runs cold when that happens. This is an invitation without narrative. So can we talk? I'd like to give you some feedback. Now I'm beginning to understand what your goal might be. I'd like to give you some feedback about blank. Okay, maybe I start to feel a little bit more safe because I have clarity about the goal and the topic, the overall story. But if you call me and say, hey, based on some recent mixed reviews from some clients, I'd love to help you improve on some key skills. When's a good time to chat about that? Now my heart rate starts to lower. My blood is no longer disturbed. I can relax. Your invitation and the narrative and your goal is clearly identified. And I can feel safe to say yes to your invitation. The challenge with narrative is that I have my own story while you are trying to share yours. And so it's really important to take a moment and ask yourself, what story are people telling themselves already? How can you connect your story to theirs and paint a clear narrative arc that connects them? To just double stitch on this, I'd just like to clarify that clarity equals safety. Painting the arc of the conversation can let people know that it's safe to come along for the ride, to open the door and step in. The last element, invitation, narrative, and goals, ING. If we want to talk about goals, there's just one really simple tool to understand the why that each one of us is living with that can help us bear with almost anyhow. And that tool is just the 9 whys. It's from the Liberating Structures pattern library. If you're not familiar with Liberating Structures, it's a really handy and amazing resource for facilitation patterns and leadership patterns. 9 whys is about asking the why behind the why, behind the why, behind the why, behind the why, knowing your why behind the why, and seeking to understand the why behind the why of others before and during and after the conversation can help create much, much deeper connection and deeper clarity. Knowing somebody's why behind the why can help you frame a more inviting invitation that appeals to deeper senses of play and purpose. So we've covered conversations as experiences, a little bit about the OS Canvas, the ING method for defining and clarifying the arc of a conversation. And the last tool with my last few minutes with you is this tool here, the conversational leadership matrix. It's about this tension between asking and telling and problem spaces and solution spaces. It's based on the work of Ed Schein, who wrote a book called Humble Inquiry, and David Rock's work, who wrote a book called Quiet Leadership. And you can see it in action here in this wonderful tweet from Shreyas Doshi, which is from a couple of months back. You're a director or VP. A manager tells you that an important launch is delayed by 8 weeks. Your first words are A, what's the root cause? B, are you sure? C, how can I help? D, thanks for sharing this. E, how are you feeling? F, why didn't we know this sooner? And so just think about this. Which ask will actually help? Here's the thing. Most of us have a built-in jump to conclusions map. We have a tendency to go straight to asking or straight to telling, to be focused on the problem or to be focused on the solution. If we're designing a conversation, it's really important to ask, what does the conversation need from me? What do the people in the conversation need from me? How can I actually help the conversation move forward? Asking about the problem is what I would call pure, humble inquiry. Asking about a solution is bringing in your coaching mindset, which is just as important and just as powerful. Focusing on telling somebody about a problem, that's radical candor. And what I love about this 2x2 matrix is that I think it's one of the rare 2x2s where one or another quadrant is not necessarily reviled. All four of these quadrants are important. Some should be used a little bit more sparingly. The management consultant mindset, where you are telling somebody about a solution to a problem you assume that they already have, can be a little dangerous, to say the least. I find that this is the gentle quadrant, and that this is a safe path for me to take most often as a consultant and as a coach. Your mileage may vary. When I use this quadrant matrix for helping people understand their own coaching and their own leadership styles, there are some people that acknowledge that they really need to be able to step up into these quadrants much more. They are always staying in this quadrant, and they really need to start moving into this and really owning what they know. I want you to go back to that conversation that you started with, that you want to engage other people in, and think to yourself, what quadrant is the conversation in now? Where do you want to lead it? And most fundamentally, how can you invite that shift? Our lives are built one conversation at a time. And the question of where you're leading your conversations is, to me, absolutely critical, how you design your approach to it. Every day we have dozens of conversations. Some of these conversations are once in a lifetime interactions that light us up, shift our course. Others seem stuck in an infinite loop and they become stale and repetitive. We count on our conversations to get us what we need and want from other people, and we all put significant effort into making them go well. It can take work to start them off right. And when they get stuck, it's hard to walk away without feeling regret or replaying them in their heads. Each and every conversation is an opportunity to change your life. And you can take a hold of that opportunity to design a new approach, or you can let that opportunity slip through your hands. Conversations matter. Thank you very much for the opportunity, and I'm really excited for the rest of the conference.